Well, hello, everyone. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here. Really great to see a lot of you in the house. Great to have those of you who are joining us online. We're really glad that you've chosen to worship with us today also. Hey, I've heard some inspiring accounts of how some people learn to lead or were called into leadership, but my introduction to becoming a leader was not my best moment. During the first year of high school for me, I was attending a student event at church when our student minister suddenly asked me to leave the room. It surprised me, and the only reason that I could imagine that he was asking me to leave was that I was being disciplined for talking to my friends, because I was usually talking to my friends. And apparently, I thought at least, our student pastor was getting tough on unauthorized chatting during the youth service, and I had become the example of the new no tolerance policy. So a moment later, I was shown the door. Out in the hallway, I considered my options. I could walk back into the room uninvited and apologize to the group, but honestly, it pained my ego to think about doing that. Plus, I wasn't even 100% sure of my crime. I was doing the time without knowing the crime. Secondly, I could wait in the hallway until someone came to get me, knowing that all eyes would be on me as I walked back to my seat, which would only add to my embarrassment. A third option that I considered was leaving the building for the remainder of the night, just going home, maybe even going home for good. There's only one problem. I loved my church, and I did not want to leave that community. So while I was weighing my options, another student opened the door where the group had been meeting without me and said, "Eddie, you can come back in now." So I walked back in the door. I'm guessing my face was a little flushed with embarrassment. I closed the door behind me, and the student pastor said, "Congratulations, Eddie, you're the student ministry president for the coming year." So while I had been sulking in the hallway, wondering if I was going to go home, the group was drafting me for a leadership role. I was pouting, I was thinking of quitting, not exactly a model beginning for a young leader. Now contrast that with what Abdul Kalam saw his project manager Satish Dhawan do. In the 1970s, Kalam was asked to lead the effort to launch a satellite into orbit for the nation of India. But in 1979, a few minutes following the launch, a valve failed and that Indian satellite crashed into the Bay of Bengal. As project manager, Kalam was dreading the press conference afterward where he would have to explain what had happened. But at the press conference, his supervisor stepped forward, took full responsibility for the failed project, and promised things would be different next time. Now that is a stand-up move for a leader. But what impresses me most is that a few years later, when that team successfully regrouped and placed the satellite in orbit, Chairman Dhawan, the man who took the blame the first time around, declined to attend the post-launch press conference and allowed Abdul Kalam, the project manager, to take the credit. Noble, humble leadership, it makes a huge difference in any environment, for any organization. The best workplaces, the best schools, the best businesses and governments, the healthiest families and churches all have at least one thing in common. All have effective, humble leadership. No wonder Romans 12:8 says, if God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. God has gifted us to lead, and He wants us to offer that gift. Effective leadership makes such a difference in our world, in every environment. You know, when I look back on my life, I can't overstate the importance of the leaders who had an impact on me. Good leadership at my home church gave my faith a healthy place to develop, gave me a vision for being in ministry. The leaders, the coaches of my sports team taught me important lessons about teamwork and determination and submitting to authority. The courageous leaders of the churches I served as a young minister taught me to do what is right in God's eyes and to leave the consequences to God. The leaders of the Christian college I attended taught me that spending most of a lifetime in one ministry location is a good way to spend your life. And here's the thing. Not all the people who taught me those leadership lessons realized that they were leading me. Some of them would not even refer to themselves as leaders, but lead they did. Friend, if you desire to influence other people, then you want to lead. That's what that desire is. It might occur in the context of parenting, where you lead your children. It might occur in the context of grandparenting. Leadership might happen among coworkers who actually occupy the same administrative level. You may be someone's friend or someone's sister-in-law or someone's neighbor or coffee date or book club buddy. But if something in you wants to inspire and help guide other people, that something is what the scriptures call leadership. And a small percentage of leaders hold visible positions and have obvious titles, but most leaders actually do not. And yet all leaders are called by God to take seriously this responsibility of influencing other people, which is more than enough reason for us to talk about leadership for a few minutes today. We're calling this series The Good Fight, and we're drawing our teaching themes from the first of two letters that Paul wrote to Timothy, and both of those letters are part of our New Testament scriptures. And in chapter 3 of 1 Timothy, Paul instructs Timothy on what to look for in church leaders. And I want us to see three qualities there that are not only important for church leaders, but are actually important for all of us who want to influence anyone in our lives. Now, before I do, I want to clear up one misconception. Some people think that the kind of leadership that is needed in organizations outside the church and the kind of leadership needed for an organization, a spiritual organization like the church, some people think those are completely different forms of leadership. And I don't believe that. In my experience, the difference between leading spiritually and leading elsewhere is often overstated, because good leadership is good anywhere. A few decades ago, some of the leadership gurus that we listened to taught a top-down kind of authoritarian style of leadership. But over time, the extreme version of that brand of leadership was shown to harm people and to harm organizations. Today, leadership experts are teaching how important it is for leaders to be servants first. They teach that leadership wisdom and integrity are more important than leadership drive. They teach that leaders empower people rather than powering up on people. But while that kind of leadership sounds fresh and hip in our business communities and in some places, followers of Jesus know that Jesus modeled and taught that kind of leadership 2,000 years ago. It has always been the kind of leadership that Jesus has encouraged us to display. Matthew 20, verse 25, Jesus says, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you." That's not how you should lead. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. Now look, that doesn't mean that it is wrong to want to be a leader. In fact, in chapter 3 of 1 Timothy, Paul makes it clear that anyone who wants to be a leader is wanting to do a noble, good thing. But it is very important for you and I to know our internal motives, our real reasons for wanting to lead. And it's very important that we recognize that we can actually have mixed motives, some motives that are noble and some motives that are more selfish. So the first thing that a leader needs to develop is a desire to succeed at home, and to succeed at home first. Now, I think some people look at these guidelines in this passage of Scripture and they see it as a test, as a list of check marks. Okay, this person has this. Okay, this person is good enough, or this person is not good enough to be a church leader, to make the cut. But I really think Paul is being much more pragmatic than that. I think as Paul talks about what kind of husband, what kind of father, what kind of parent a leader ought to be, I think he is just being very practical, and he's laying down a truth that all of us instinctively realize. And that is that if you lead your family well, you are likely to lead well in other places. If your relationship with your spouse is healthy, then your relationships with coworkers or people in a volunteer organization is going to tend to be healthy. It's just common sense. If you want a window into how a person might lead others, then just get a glimpse of how he or she leads and influences at home. Now look at verses 4 and 5 of 1 Timothy 3. They say this directly. He, the leader, must manage his family well, having children who respect and obey him. Now that means that if you're going to be a leader in the church, your children can never disobey you, right? And never show disrespect for you. We all know it doesn't mean that. He goes on, for if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? You see how practical, how logical he is being? If you lead well in one place, then you're probably going to lead well in another. But how well is well? How well do you have to lead before you're leading well enough? Well, Paul doesn't really attempt to answer that question. He doesn't go down the rabbit hole of just how well is well enough. He puts the principle out there, and he knows that churches like ours and that other environments and organizations are going to have to wrestle with how well a person needs to manage his personal life, his family, in order to lead in another location. One of the tricky parts about this principle is that the people we live with can actually be the most difficult people for us to influence. Am I right about that? You're the first ones to applaud that line this morning, the third service. Okay. But I think we all could applaud because we know that we are difficult to lead and influence at home, and we know that it's difficult to influence other people at home. And if you are a humble person about your leadership at home, it would be very easy for every one of us to conclude, well, if this is God's guideline, then I should never lead anything, because there are times when I feel completely incapable of leading at home. There are times when I feel like I have messed this thing up royally. When I see that line that reads, children who respect and obey their parents, I don't see a rule that eliminates anyone who's ever had a tough season raising a child. I just see Paul describing someone who has learned how to exercise authority effectively without completely alienating people who are living under that authority. There's another quality that Paul is driving at here, and I think this is huge in our families, and it becomes very huge in church leadership too. And that quality is determination. Do you know what the primary requirement is for a healthy family? It's dedication. It's perseverance. It's resolve. It's refusal to give up. When I was in an especially stubborn and frankly stupid season of my teen years, I recall my mom saying to me, she was standing at the bottom of the steps, I was standing up on the landing. She said, I am not going to let you choose a poor path without a fight. Now my mom was like 5'1", so I don't think she was talking about that kind of a fight. What was she saying to me? She was saying, I'm not quitting. I'm not giving up on you. I'm not shrugging my shoulders. I'm not going to stand by and say nothing while you downgrade your life. Now, could my mom control all of my choices? No. And every parent has had to face that truth. But at that point in my life, while I was still living under her roof, she wanted me to know that she was going to fight the good fight. So I backed down and never did anything wrong ever again. In fact, that halo emoji on your phone, that's me. Actually, my mom is going to hear this sermon sometime this morning, and she'll probably be using the eye roll emoji when she hears that. Hey, look, when someone refuses to give up at home, when someone refuses to quit, when sometimes it becomes a drag and you can't even see how things are going to turn out, it builds character into that person. And that's the kind of character we're looking for when we're looking for people to help lead things in the church. And that's the kind of character that other organizations should be looking for. Paul knew that. So he told us you should look for leaders who won't give up at home and who will stay fighting the good fight. Norma Brickey is an 84-year-old mother who drives around Columbus, Ohio with a sign on her SUV that reads, "My son needs a kidney, type O positive." Norma and her sons all have a genetic kidney disorder. And she and one of her sons have already had kidney transplants. And she's determined to help her other son find a donor. Now, what I love about Norma is that she has inspired other people to place signs, like the sign on her SUV, on their cars, even though they're not friends of the family or even acquaintances. And you might say, well, that's a mother's love. That's what a mom will do. Well, that's true. It's also leadership. When you can influence people to adopt a passion that you have and it becomes their passion, that is leadership. And that is what Norma is displaying at home. And we want to find people who display that kind of leadership at home so that those people can be a part of the leadership team at our church. And that's what every environment should be looking for in its leaders. The second thing that Paul calls a leader to do is to live a life that's worth emulating. To live in a way that if other people choose to copy it, to mimic it, that it's going to turn out well for them. Now, the world that Paul and Timothy lived in was not a pristine world when it came to moral choices. If you think of Bible times as times when everybody walked around saying, God bless you, and they didn't get into the kind of sins that we get in today, you haven't read your Bible very closely. Because all these places that Paul wrote letters to, where these churches have been planted, it's kind of like the church planting organization that we partner with. We go to hard places, we go to large cities, and we help plant churches because that's where we want to see the gospel take root. That's where the Apostle Paul planted churches, and Ephesus was that kind of a town. Ephesus was a place of parties and a place of passions, and a lot of it was out of control. And the definition of normal in Ephesus would have allowed for a lot of self-indulgent behavior. This is what I'm saying. If people in the church had decided we're going to be normal Ephesians and live like normal Ephesians, then they wouldn't have lived lives that were pleasing to God. So Paul challenged Timothy to live a better kind of life, and he challenged Timothy to challenge the people of the Ephesian church to live a better lifestyle. Paul wanted people to be intentional about every part of our lives. And I want to ask you, are you simply patterning your life after the world around you? Or are you choosing an intentional life? Are you living the kind of life that God calls you to live? And by the way, one reason he calls you to live that way is for your benefit. Look at verses 2 and 3 of 1 Timothy 3. So a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. Again, that doesn't mean perfect. It just means someone who is admirable. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live wisely, have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home, talking about someone who's hospitable. And he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, not love money. So you can see there are these qualities, and they're really, it's kind of a random list of things, it feels like, because these things go in different categories of human behavior. And it's easy to go through that and, again, to just have a check-the-box mentality. Well, does this person quarrel a lot? Does this person drink too much? Okay. But really, everything in this list and the other lists that Paul gives when he's talking about leaders, it really just falls into two categories of behavior. And I think you and I can take these categories away. These are the categories that are important if you and I are going to live wisely. That's how Paul said it. He wants us to live wisely. The first category is we have to make productive choices. Proactively building habits like showing hospitality to others. It takes time and effort to show hospitality to others. And Paul said, I want to see that kind of effort in the life of a church leader. Teaching others God's truth. Choosing to communicate in a gentle way rather than in an overly forceful way. These are good examples of how we choose good things. But choosing to do good things, listen to this, choosing to do good things is not enough if you want to live a good life. We also have to avoid destructive choices because there are people who do good things, but they don't avoid destructive choices, and those choices end up wrecking their lives. Now, Paul talks about what some of these things are. Being unfaithful in your marriage, drinking too much or too often, resorting to violent words or actions, obsessing over money or things. You've probably heard people talk about their good and bad choices in terms of a scale. And maybe you've heard someone say, and maybe you have said, I just want to reach the end of my life and have the good things I've done outweigh the bad things I've done. You've heard someone say that? Maybe you've said that. And people who say that think that the way life works is that if you get to the end of your life and then that scale tips toward the good stuff, then your life has been well lived. But that's an incomplete view. And it's really an uninformed view. The reality is that not all good choices and not all bad choices weigh the same in our lives. Not every decision impacts our lives to an equal degree. Look, any sin is a sin, but not every sin is going to impact your life in the same way. And every noble choice, every good deed is a good deed, but not every good work is going to impact your life in the same way. Different kinds of actions will add a different amount of weight to the scale of your life. And look, not only do good deeds and bad deeds impact our lives to different degrees, but here's a principle that we all need to make sure we take out of here today. Sinful choices outweigh good choices. You make a good choice, you make a sinful choice, that's not a balanced scale. Because the sinful choice is going to outweigh the good choice that you make. And I think most of us have experienced this in some way, where a lot of things in our lives we were doing well, but we made one significant choice and it actually changed the direction of our lives for a season. So let's say you drive to another state to visit your family or to take some vacation. And let's say you obey the traffic laws faithfully most of the way. This is hypothetical for most of us. No speeding, no operating your phone while you're driving. You even signal when you change lanes and there's not even another car around. I mean, you are a model citizen behind the wheel on this trip. Now, you and I both know that you're a lot more rebellious than that, but let's just pretend for a minute, okay? But then you're on your way home, and just before you get home, you decide that since you can see that there are no cars even approaching the intersection, you're going to roll through a four-way stop because there's no traffic there. And that's when a state trooper sees you and pulls you over and tickets you. Now look, you were a conscientious driver for like 99% of the trip. But that one momentary lapse in judgment outweighs all the good and considerate driving that you did throughout the trip. You don't text your friend after you get a ticket and say, I was an incredibly lawful driver for 99% of my recent trip. No, you text your friend and say, I got a ticket right before I get home. Why? Because our poor choices, our sinful choices actually outweigh our good choices. I've seen people go to one bar, one night, have one drink with one person, make one decision about what they're doing and where they're going afterward, and it has upended their entire lives. People who've done good thing after good thing after good thing after good thing. But one poor choice, one moment of lapsed judgment outweighs all those other choices. It's tough for me to choose a favorite verse from the book of Ecclesiastes. If you haven't read that book, you really ought to check it out. It's in the Old Testament. It's packed with so much wisdom and so many memorable lines. But one of my favorites is the beginning of Ecclesiastes chapter 10. It reads, "As dead flies cause even a bottle of perfume to stink." I just love how vivid that verse is. Let's read the rest of it together, beginning with the word "so." You ready? "So a little foolishness spoils great wisdom and honor." That's true, isn't it? You know, if your soup comes in the restaurant and there's one little gnat in it, you don't spoon it out, throw it over your shoulder and keep going. No, you feel like the whole bowl of soup is ruined. And the fly in the perfume, it's ruined it. Lots of wisdom and lots of honor can actually be undone by one act of stupidity. It's not fair, is it? It's not fair, but it's true. We can see this in the lives of some Old Testament heroes. God chose David to be king because David had this huge heart for God. I mean, he was a guy who genuinely loved God. God said that himself about David. But David made some choices that led to other sinful choices, and those few choices brought huge grief and dysfunction to him and to his family and to the entire nation. And look, that's why we not only have to build our lives on good, positive, godly decisions, but we have to make a point of avoiding poor, sinful, selfish decisions. And if you want to be a leader, if you want to influence other people, then you not only have to do some good things, but you have to take control of your life and your decisions and avoid some destructive things. Because the devil loves to set traps for us. And he loves it when we forget that our bad choices actually outweigh our good ones. Finally and quickly, if you and I are going to influence and lead other people, we have to resist the urge to serve ourselves. It's so easy for us to see our leadership roles as position and as privilege. And we have to remember that the way of Jesus is to use influence and to use position for him. There are people who look for a way around this principle, but it will always, always be true. There's no way around it. There's no bypass. There's no loophole. Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Jesus said that he is going to make sure that people who influence others in the way he taught us to do it win in the end. So let's commit ourselves. Let's dedicate ourselves to leading and influencing the way Jesus did. Let's pray.